The restaurant glowed like a palace of glass. Crystal chandeliers hung above, scattering gold across white linens. Soft jazz hummed in the air. Laughter echoed from wealthy tables. People who had never known hunger, never tasted loss. Among them moved Emily, a young waitress in a faded uniform. Her smile was gentle, but forced. Behind it lived sleepless nights, unpaid bills, and the silence of dreams left behind. Every tray she carried was heavier than it looked, not because of the plates, but because of the life she never got to live. Her father once promised her, "Someday you'll finish college. You'll shine," but that someday never came. He was gone, taken by time and tragedy that no one helped her family survive. Tonight felt no different. Just another shift, another night serving strangers who wouldn't remember her name. Until fate, quiet and invisible, placed her before him. At the corner table sat a man who drew every eye without even trying. Silver hair, tailored navy suit, calm, sharp, powerful. Alexander Grant, the billionaire everyone respected and no one truly knew. Emily approached slowly, pouring water into his glass with the practiced grace of someone used to being unseen. But as she reached for the next glass, her eyes caught something. A folder, leather-bound. Not a menu, something heavier. Inside, a page marked with lines, diagrams, and a signature. She froze. Her breath faltered. That name, those familiar strokes, the curve, the slant. She had seen them before. On old birthday cards, on school forms, on one final note from the man she loved most. Her voice trembled out before her mind could stop it. "Sir, that's my dad's signature." The billionaire's head turned sharply. His eyes, cold as steel, met hers. The air went still. No music, no laughter, just silence. For a heartbeat, time stopped. The glass slipped from his hand, crashed, water splashing across the white cloth like shattered memories. And in that single, fragile moment, two worlds collided, one built from pain, the other from power. Neither would ever be the same again. The sound of shattering glass still echoed in Emily's chest. For a moment, everything stood still. But before we return to that table, before we see what destiny had planned, we must step back into the life that shaped her silence. Emily Hayes had grown up believing that hard work could fix anything. Her father, William, used to say, "We may not have much, sweetheart, but we have heart. And heart is everything," she believed him, until the day the world proved him wrong. When he passed away, the world did not pause for their pain. The bills didn't wait. The rent didn't forgive. The dreams didn't survive. Her mother, once graceful and bright, grew quiet, worn by the endless fight to keep a roof overhead. Emily watched the light fade from her eyes and promised herself she'd be strong, no matter what it cost. So she worked. Days, nights, weekends, serving tables, cleaning floors, chasing tips that could barely feed two. The sound of clinking coins became her lullaby, and the scent of food she couldn't afford filled her every breath. She would watch families dine together, fathers laughing with daughters, and smile politely, while her own heart cracked a little more each time. Sometimes, when the restaurant closed, she'd sit alone at the back table counting her earnings, a few wrinkled bills, a handful of coins. Never enough. But she would whisper, "Tomorrow will be better." It rarely was. College brochures still sat folded in her drawer, their colors faded, their promises silent. Once she wanted to study design, to build beautiful things. Now she built ours instead, stacked one on top of another, until exhaustion became her home. The world outside the restaurant sparkled, cars gliding by, people laughing under neon lights. But for Emily, time had stopped long ago. Her life had narrowed to survival. Her smile had become a mask she wore out of habit. And yet somewhere deep within, a tiny voice refused to die. It whispered every time she saw a shooting star, every time she helped a stranger, every time she remembered her father's words. Kindness never leaves you, Emily. It always finds a way back. She didn't know how much those words were about to mean, because fate, patient, quiet, and merciful, had waited years for this night, for this table, for this one encounter that would tear open the walls she'd built. She thought she was just serving water, but she was about to serve destiny. As she moved between the glowing tables, balancing trays and soft smiles, her eyes wandered, to families, lovers, friends, to lives that looked easy. She wondered what it felt like to laugh without fear, to sleep without worry, to dream without guilt. But she pushed the thought aside. Dreams didn't pay the rent. Her fingers tightened around the jug of water. Her steps stayed steady, practiced. Another table. Another stranger. Another night. She didn't know that just a few steps away sat the man whose choices once shaped her fate. And as the chandeliers shimmered above and music filled the air, the universe prepared to weave their stories together. A forgotten friendship, a buried betrayal, and a daughter who would unknowingly awaken both. Because sometimes, the heaviest pain hides behind the softest smiles, and sometimes the girl serving your table is carrying a story you were always meant to hear. The chandeliers shimmered above, but at the corner table, light seemed to bend differently, subtler, quieter, as if afraid to touch the man who sat there. Alexander Grant. In every business headline, his name carried weight when a man of vision, precision, and unstoppable rise. People called him a genius, a machine, a legend. They never called him human, because no one saw the cracks beneath the marble. He had built an empire of glass towers, watched cities change under his name. Every contract, every deal was a brick laid between himself and the world. He told himself it was protection, but somewhere along the climb, the wall became a prison. Tonight, as laughter rippled around him, Alexander barely heard it. He sat with a folder open before him, a folder pulled from old archives earlier that day. His legal team had found it while reviewing ancient files. He had planned to skim it over dinner, sign a note, close another chapter. He didn't know it would open one he'd buried long ago. Inside were blueprints, signatures, names, people who once stood beside him at the beginning. Men and women who believed in a dream before it, turned into an empire, and there, on the corner of one page, one was a signature that had once been like a brother's. Handshake, William Hayes Alexander's. Hand paused over the ink, his eyes tracing the letters. Memory stirred, unwanted, uninvited. A young man in his 20s, standing beside William, both holding rolled-up papers, smiling at the future. Someday, Alex, William had said, we'll build something that matters, something that changes lives. And for a while they did. They worked side by side, William full of warmth and vision, Alexander sharp and relentless. But ambition is a strange fire. It warms at first and then burns everything if left unchecked. A single disagreement, one decision, one misunderstanding, and friendship became rivalry. Contracts turned cold, words became weapons. When success finally came, Alexander was alone. He told himself it was the price of greatness. But sometimes, in quiet moments, he wondered if it had been the cost of his soul. He remembered hearing of William's death years later, a brief note in a paper, a name he couldn't face. He had looked away, buried himself deeper in work, and never spoke of it again. But life has a way of returning what you ignore. As he studied the old page, something heavy pressed in his chest, a guilt he couldn't name. He sighed, shut the folder, and reached for his glass of water, and that was when she approached. He barely noticed her at first, just another server, polite and quiet, until her trembling voice broke the air. "Sir, that's my dad's signature." The words hit like a thunderclap. He looked up, saw the shock in her eyes, the tears fighting to hold back, the faint resemblance in the curve of her face. For a heartbeat, his breath caught. William's eyes stared back at him, not through memory, but through his daughter. The glass slipped. It shattered, spilling cold water across white cloth, like time undoing itself. And in that silence, his entire empire suddenly felt small. He saw not the waitress, but the daughter of a man he'd once called brother. A man he never said goodbye to, a man whose family he never sought out. What had become of them? How had they survived after William's fall? Did his own success come at the cost of theirs? Questions rose like ghosts around him. Every heartbeat pounded with the weight of years unspoken. For the first time in decades, Alexander Grant, the billionaire untouchable, felt powerless. He wanted to ask her everything, but his voice failed. So he just stared into the reflection of his past, into the eyes that demanded an answer without saying a word. Around them, The restaurant carried on, music playing, glasses clinking, but in that small corner, time held its breath. He realized something that shook him deeper than any loss or profit. All his wealth, all his buildings, all his fame. None could buy back the years he'd left behind. The page before him wasn't just paper. It was proof. Proof that no success is free. Proof that every signature carries a story. And tonight, fate had brought him face to face with his. The crash of glass echoed across the restaurant. Every head turned, and startled faces, whispers, confusion. But for Alexander and Emily, the world had gone silent. Time didn't move. Air felt thick. Between them lay a single truth neither could name aloud. Emily froze, heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't meant to say it. The words had slipped out, raw, trembling, unstoppable. But the moment she saw his face change, she knew she wasn't wrong. The billionaire, the man whose name filled headlines, was staring at her not with anger, but with something deeper. Older, familiar. Alexander blinked once. Then again, his lips parted but no sound came. He reached out, fingers hovering just above the folder, as if afraid to touch the past. What did you just say? Emily swallowed hard, her throat tight, voice barely a whisper. That's my dad's signature. William Hayes, he passed away years ago. Her words trembled, breaking halfway through. A quiet tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. Alexander's breath caught in his chest. The name echoed in his mind, like a bell ringing from another lifetime. William Hayes, the friend who once called him brother, the man whose laughter still haunted his silence. Alexander leaned back slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. A storm gathered behind them, a mix of disbelief, regret, and something dangerously close to guilt. You're William's daughter? Emily nodded. Her lips quivered. You knew him? That question, so innocent, so sharp, cut straight through him. He looked down at the spilled glass, at the scattered drops of water catching light like tiny mirrors. In each reflection he saw a younger version of himself, ambitious, proud, blind. He whispered as if confessing to a ghost. I didn't just know him. I built everything I have because of him. Emily frowned slightly, unsure if she heard right. Alexander continued, his voice lower, heavier. Your father was my partner, my best friend. We dreamed together, before any of this existed. His eyes glistened now, the kind of tears that never fall, the kind a man learns to hide behind success. I thought I was doing what was right, chasing something bigger, but somewhere along the way I forgot why we started. Emily took a small step closer, confusion softening into ache. Then why? Why didn't you ever find us? We lost everything when he died. I was 13. Mom worked 3 jobs. I waited for someone to help, but no one came. Her voice cracked. The words came like broken glass, sharp, painful, impossible to stop. Alexander's chest tightened. He wanted to speak, to explain, but no excuse could erase years of silence. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw every scar life had carved. In her trembling hands, he saw the weight of nights she never should have faced alone. In her eyes, he saw the ghost of a friend he'd betrayed by forgetting. I didn't know, he whispered hoarsely. God help me, I didn't know. Emily shook her head, voice breaking. You could have looked. You had the power. You just didn't care. Her words hit harder than any deal he'd ever lost. For the first time in years, he had no answer, no control. A silence stretched between them. Raw, unfiltered. The restaurant noise returned faintly. A clink, a laugh, the hum of music, but none of it mattered. Here sat a billionaire who had everything and except peace. And before him stood a waitress who had nothing and except truth. He drew in a shaky breath, his voice low, broken. Emily, if I could turn back time, I'd trade every dollar I have to undo the day I lost your father. Emily blinked back tears. You can't undo the past, Mr. Grant. Her tone softened, not forgiving, but honest. But maybe you can finally face it. Alexander looked at her, and for the first time he didn't see a stranger. He saw the daughter of a man who once called him family, a daughter life had made invisible, and maybe, just maybe, this meeting wasn't an accident. That night, Alexander Grant couldn't sleep. The city skyline glittered outside his penthouse windows, a sea of gold lights stretching into the horizon. But for the first time in years, it all looked meaningless. The silence in his office was suffocating. The walls, once symbols of triumph, now felt like a cage built out of pride. Every framed award, every news headline, every photograph of his empire seemed to whisper one thing: you forgot where you came from. He poured himself a glass of water, the sound of it filling the silence. But even that reminded him of her. The trembling hands, the shock in her eyes, the voice that said, "Sir, that's my dad's signature." He gripped the glass tighter, and it shattered. Water spilled across his desk, shards glittering like tiny mirrors. Each piece reflected a part of him he didn't recognize anymore. He sank into his chair, elbows on the desk, face in his hands. For a long time, he didn't move. In the quiet, old memories returned. William Hayes laughing in the sun, their hands shaking after signing their first deal, the promise they made to always share what they built. Alexander had broken that promise. When ambition took over, he started cutting corners, changing terms, chasing investors, convincing himself that it's just business. But it wasn't just business. It was betrayal. And when William disappeared after that final argument, Alexander never searched for him. He buried his guilt under millions of dollars and towering buildings. He told himself that William had chosen to walk away, that some people just couldn't keep up, but now he knew. William hadn't walked away. Life had pushed him down, and Alexander never looked back to help. He rose from his chair, pacing across the floor. The city lights flickered across his face like fading stars. He whispered to the empty room, "William, I failed you." A knock at the door broke his silence. It was his assistant, nervous, holding a folder. "Sir, the contract you requested, the one with Mr. Hayes, I found the original in the archives." Alexander nodded slowly, taking the folder. His eyes lingered on the familiar signature, the one Emily had recognized so instantly. Her father's name. Her father's dreams. He traced the ink with his thumb, feeling the weight of every choice that had led to this moment. The billionaire who once conquered everything now felt powerless, because the one thing he truly wanted was forgiveness. The next day, Alexander returned to the restaurant, not as a customer, but as a man seeking redemption. Emily was there, arranging glasses, her face pale from sleepless nights, still processing the shock of what had happened. When she saw him, she froze. Part of her wanted to walk away, to avoid reopening the wound. But something in his eyes made her stay. Alexander approached quietly, his tone softer than she'd ever heard. "Emily, I owe you more than words. And I owe your father more than I can ever repay." She hesitated, her gaze guarded. "You don't owe us anything, Mr. Grant. The past is gone." He shook his head firmly. "No, the past may be gone, but it doesn't have to stay buried." He placed a folder on the counter. It was a document, a newly printed, freshly signed. "This is for you and your mother. A full scholarship for you. Tuition, housing, everything. And financial support for your family. Not charity, not pity, but something your father deserved and never got." Emily's breath hitched. She didn't reach for the folder. Her hands trembled. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. Alexander's eyes glistened. "Because your father believed in me when no one else did. He taught me integrity, loyalty, values I forgot chasing success. And seeing you reminded me what I became when I lost those things." He looked down, voice breaking. "You shouldn't have grown up suffering for my mistakes. I can't undo the past, Emily, but I can make sure your future doesn't look like mine." Tears filled her eyes. Years of pain pressed against her chest. And now, for the first time, someone was acknowledging it, but forgiveness doesn't come easy. She asked softly, "Do you think giving money can fix everything?" Alexander paused. "No, money can't fix what I broke, but maybe kindness can start what pride destroyed." Her gaze softened. For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the quiet hum of music filled the air, gentle, almost sacred. Emily finally reached for the folder, slowly, hesitantly. Her fingers brushed his. "If my dad were here," she said quietly, "he'd probably forgive you. He always believed people could change." A faint smile crossed Alexander's face, and fragile, almost breaking. Then maybe I can start proving him right. Weeks passed. Emily's life began to shift. She left the restaurant and enrolled in college, something she once thought impossible. Her mother finally slept without fear of eviction. Laughter returned to their home, soft, hesitant, but real. Meanwhile, Alexander worked in silence. He launched the William Hayes Foundation, funding education for underprivileged youth. Every donation carried a promise to never forget the man who helped him dream. But more than money, Alexander found peace. He spent evenings visiting the small gravesite where William rested, not as a billionaire, but as a friend seeking forgiveness. He didn't speak much and just sat there watching the sunset with the quiet ache of someone who finally remembered what mattered. As Emily stood before her classroom months later, holding her first scholarship certificate, she looked up at the sky and whispered, "We did it, Dad." And miles away in a silent boardroom, Alexander smiled for the first time without guilt shadowing his heart. Sometimes life doesn't give you second chances, but if it does, you must take them, because redemption is not earned by wealth but by the courage to say, "I was wrong, and I want to make it right." But can true forgiveness ever erase the scars of the past? And when kindness is born from guilt, is it redemption or just repayment? The morning sun painted the city in gold. It was one of those rare mornings when everything felt calm, as if the world, for once, had paused to listen. Inside a small community hall, a banner fluttered gently against the wall. The William Hayes Foundation, where second chances begin. Rows of chairs filled the room, faces from every walk of life, students, mothers, young dreamers, all gathered to witness something that had started with one broken glass, one lost signature, and one act of courage. Alexander stood at the podium, hands trembling slightly. For a man who had commanded boardrooms filled with the most powerful people in the world, this moment felt heavier than all of them combined. He looked at the crowd, but his eyes found Emily sitting in the front row, her mother beside her smiling softly. For a heartbeat, Alexander's throat tightened. He took a slow breath and began to speak. "There was a man, years ago, who taught me everything I know about honesty, hard work, and heart. His name was William Hayes." The room fell silent. Every word carried the weight of decades, of guilt, gratitude, and redemption. "I lost him," he continued quietly, "because I lost sight of what truly matters. I spent years chasing numbers, believing success was measured by wealth. But I forgot that real success is measured by the lives we touch." A hush spread across the hall. Somewhere, someone wiped a tear. "This foundation," he said, "isn't just my way of honoring a friend. It's my promise that no child, no family will ever be forgotten the way his was." He paused, his gaze softening. "And today, standing before you, I'm reminded that kindness doesn't erase pain, but it gives it purpose." Emily's eyes welled with tears. She had heard powerful speeches before, but this wasn't power. This was truth. When the applause finally rose, it wasn't loud and it was warm. The kind of applause that carried respect, not spectacle. Later, after the ceremony ended, Alexander and Emily stood by the window together. Outside, a group of young students laughed, holding new scholarship forms in their hands, the first recipients of William Hayes's legacy. Emily smiled softly. "They look so happy." Alexander nodded, his voice gentle. "They remind me of what your father used to say. The world doesn't need more successful people. It needs more kind ones." Emily turned to look at him. "I think he'd be proud of you." Alexander exhaled slowly, eyes glistening with emotion. "No, Emily, he'd be proud of you. You found me when I had forgotten who I was." For a moment, silence settled between them. Not heavy, but peaceful. The kind that exists when broken things finally start to heal. Emily looked out the window again, watching the sun shimmer over the city. "You know," she whispered, "for so long I thought pain was a punishment. But maybe it was just life pushing us toward something greater." Alexander nodded. "Sometimes life breaks us apart, just to bring us back together, in a better way." They stood there for a while, watching strangers laugh. People who had no idea that their futures were being rewritten because of a friendship born decades ago. Weeks passed, and the foundation grew. Scholarships reached children in small towns. Single mothers found hope again, and forgotten dreams began to rise from the dust. Every time a student walked across a stage, every time a family smiled through tears of gratitude, it felt like another piece of William's memory had been restored. Emily continued her studies, determined to carry her father's legacy forward, not with anger, but with compassion. She often visited Alexander's office, not as an employee, but as a friend. Together, they reviewed projects, planned outreach programs, and made sure every penny reached the ones who needed it most. For Alexander, these moments became his true measure of success. Not stock reports, not media headlines, but the quiet joy of giving back. And every evening when the city lights shimmered outside his window, he would whisper softly, "Thank you, William, for sending her back to remind me." One afternoon, as Emily left the office, she turned back and asked, "Mr. Grant, do you ever wonder if fate had planned all this?" He smiled, a real smile this time, not the polished one he wore for cameras. "Maybe it wasn't fate, Emily. Maybe it was kindness when waiting for the right moment to be seen." She nodded, her eyes shining. "Then I guess kindness really does live on." And as the sun dipped behind the skyline, two lives once divided by loss now stood united by something stronger: forgiveness. Because sometimes, it doesn't take a miracle to change the world. Just one person brave enough to say, "It's never too late to be kind." If you had one chance to make things right, to heal a wound you caused long ago, would you take it? Before it's too late? The evening breeze carried a quiet peace over the city. Streetlights flickered on one by one, casting a golden glow across the paths that had once felt cold and forgotten. Emily stood on a small bridge overlooking the river, her reflection shimmering in the rippling water below. Beside her, Alexander leaned on the railing, older, quieter, but lighter than he had ever been. They didn't speak for a while. The sound of rushing water filled the silence, soft and steady, like the heartbeat of time itself. Finally, Emily broke the stillness. "Do you ever think about how everything started?" Alexander smiled faintly, eyes distant. "Every day. One moment, one simple sentence changed everything." She nodded slowly. "It's strange, isn't it? A broken glass, a signature, a conversation. And suddenly two lives that should have never crossed found each other." He turned toward her, his gaze filled with gratitude. "You know, Emily, when I first saw you, I only saw a waitress. But that night, you became my mirror. You showed me everything I'd lost trying to be powerful." Emily's eyes softened. "And you showed me something I'd forgotten too, that people can change if they truly want to." They both smiled, not the kind that hides pain, but the kind that forgives it. Later that night, Alexander visited a quiet corner of the city, a small gravestone under a maple tree. He placed fresh flowers beside it, his hand resting gently against the cold stone. "We did it, William," he whispered. "Your dream didn't die with you. It just waited until I was ready to understand." A tear slipped down his cheek, not of sorrow, but of peace. He stood there for a moment longer, then turned back toward the world, toward the foundation, toward the lives still waiting to be changed. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and slowly a ripple of kindness began to spread. Students graduated, families found homes, young dreamers built futures, all carrying the name of a man whose kindness lived on through them. Emily became one of the foundation's directors, her voice calm, her heart full. She no longer served tables. Now she served hope, and Alexander, while he no longer chased headlines, he chased impact. The billionaire who once measured life in profit now measured it in smiles. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Emily stood before a crowd of students. Her voice trembled, but her words were strong. "Kindness doesn't erase pain. It transforms it. My story began in loss, but it ended in purpose." She paused, looking toward the sky, the same sky under which her father once dreamed. "If you're watching this," she whispered, "remember, even in the darkest night, one small act of compassion can bring back the light." The crowd applauded softly. But somewhere beyond applause, something greater stirred, a belief reborn. Because in the end, it was never just about a billionaire or a waitress. It was about the truth we all forget. Life will test you with pain, but it will bless you with chances to heal others. And those who choose kindness, even after being broken, they are the ones who truly change the world. If you had the power to turn regret into kindness, would you take it? Because sometimes, one moment of compassion is enough to rewrite a lifetime.